Welcome to The Main Perspective, Episode 5 of the podcast series, Trust Across Race and Culture, The Pandemic Impact. Dialogue with two amazing multiracial and Native American women. I'm your host, Regina Wharton. Let me introduce our speakers. Joella Jones, graduate, Columbia Law School, class of 2020, and NYU Masters, French Studies. Dana Lowry Ramsour, librarian, Central Cabarrus High School, North Carolina. The complexity of what's happening today is mind-blowing. The awareness of structural racism is showing up everywhere you turn. The question is, how do we make bold changes fast to stop the pain and suffering? No justice, no peace. In fact, the brands we grew up with are changing racist names and packaging. The Washington Redskins, Aunt Jemima syrup, Land O'Lakes butter, Uncle Ben's rice, Mrs. Butterworth. In fact, everyday words and phrases that have racist connotations are on the list. Let's be clear. These are all bad interpretations of who we are deeply ingrained in our consciousness. Joella, as a multicultural woman, how has all this come to light for you?
Hi, Regina. Thank you so much for having me. I think the time we're in now is really special in that a lot of different people are starting to recognize how so many of the symbols that we see every day really do have a violent history and past. And I am really happy that so many people are paying attention. And, you know, it's been a complicated experience for me growing up as a multiracial woman, but I'm glad to see so much conversation about these things now.
Dana, how about you? As a Native American, how has this all come to light for you?
Definitely, when I go around and speak on behalf of my tribe, there's lots of times that I'm asked around Thanksgiving. But I look at every opportunity of talking about my tribe as an opportunity to just let people know that we still exist. So I'm certainly inspired by the youth that are creating a movement, recording a movement, and not letting anything down. I feel like the lesson from them that I can learn, as well as everyone else, is to not give up and keep fighting the fight, that we can push things forward.
Joella, tell us where you grew up and when did you become proud of your racial background?
So I grew up in Denver, Colorado, and I definitely have my parents to thank and my family for the ways in which I became proud growing up of my racial background. So my dad is Black and my mom is white and part Chinese. And growing up, I got a lot of questions, what are you? Are you, Hispanic or Latina? But my parents did a really great job of teaching me the history of my heritage and understanding where our families came from, and that, it's possible to be proud of more than one thing at once.
How do you manage that?
A lot of people talk about, code switching and sort of embodying different identities depending on who you're with. But I think for me, the most liberating thing has been to understand that I can be myself, and that doesn't necessarily have to change based on who I'm hanging out with or what family members I'm with. So it's definitely complicated at times. And I've always been, scared of not being Black enough or, being othered in predominantly white spaces. But for me, I think the most important thing has just been to embrace my identity and know that I'm just me, no matter who I'm with.
Is it similar for you, Dana?
Absolutely. I have had the same conversations as Joella, as people come up and say, what are you? Especially when I was younger. And I think I had a little bit of angst about that because I wanted the answer to be, we're the human race. But then I grew to learn that I needed to be that representative of my tribe, the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. So, but I've definitely had, people come up and speak Spanish to me, and I have to explain, I wish I knew Spanish, but I don't. So I think that, almost every time they'll try to guess, and none of the guesses are Native American. So I think, again, that puts a weight on me to be able to speak on behalf of my tribe so that once they meet a Lumbee like myself, they'll be able to say, oh, yeah, I know a Lumbee. I had her on this podcast and I found out this about them, so that you can have that conversation. So I like that Joella balances both of them equally and feels like, they both have an importance and she can tell that story. I actually hope that the world looks a lot more like Joella in the future, so that, we can just be the human race, I guess.
So there are 5 million Native Americans in the U.S., and 78% live outside of reservations. I don't know if many people realize that. Can you say more?
Right. I think when we hear or know of Native American history, it's usually of the European settlements, of our history books. But there's a lot of tribes, and each tribe is completely different. So Native Americans make up 2% of the world population. And in that 2% are completely different tribes from one another. So we're the minorities of the minorities. Each one of us have cultural differences, physical appearance differences. For my tribe, since 1885, we've been trying to be fully federally recognized. We are partially federally recognized and fully state recognized. So what that comes down to is we don't receive a check like a lot of reservation tribes do. And my tribe has done everything for this, 135 years to become recognized. Even in 1936, these two scientists came to our community and said, if you want to be fully recognized, we can put you through the Seltzer report. And Seltzer was one of the scientists. And what he did in that report was he measured the nostril cavity, the hair texture, the skin color on the female's breast, the fullness of the lips. And these two Caucasian men would determine if we were Native American. And what they were comparing that to, we found out later, was a Navajo man. And as beautiful as the Navajo community, or the Navajo nation is, I don't look Navajo. I look like my people. But my mom drank out of a third water fountain because it was a triracial community. So there's been continuous struggles that we've had. But I am one of the tribes that is not on a reservation. And there is some good things about that because I've had opportunities to work on reservations, and it's tough because a lot of people, if free money's coming in, you just wait for that free money to come in. So my people have had to fight and be educated and work hard because we don't have that federal money coming in. But in our community, Robeson County, it's the poorest community in North Carolina. So I feel like it's time for some government aid for us, not as a handout, but just like a hand up, just to get us out of this poverty-stricken suicide, heart conditions, cancer. We need a hand up. And unfortunately, we can't do that unless we're fully recognized or on a reservation.
As I'm listening to you tell the story about, oh my goodness, being brought in a room and the whole trying to determine whether you were real Native or not, I have to tell you that I was getting a little bit choked up because that is just so sad. When did you become aware that that was one of the struggles around your tribe?
Very late in life. I've had a very strong involvement in my tribe. We've always been a part of cultural programs. My family is very tight knit, like third and fourth cousins are best friends. But I think as a teenager, I was part of the Charlotte Native American Youth Organization. And in those programs, we had a wonderful leader, and she took us to be governor's pages in Washington and work at other reservations and work on conferences and all this community service. And she told us we needed to be ambassadors of our tribe and always speak. So from there, I learned a lot of things about my tribe that I didn't know as a young person. And even when I asked my mom about drinking from the third water fountain, I mean, her response was, I was just glad that we had a water fountain. It wasn't anger. It was just, well, at least we had a water fountain. And I think to myself, gosh, I would have been a totally different person, but maybe I wouldn't have. Maybe I would have just been happy to have a water fountain. So tough conversations that I learned late in life that you just kind of carry with you, because you want to think that your grandparents were treated fairly and good. And when you learn that that is otherwise, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I call that the pain of the past.
Mm-hmm.
So the pain, we all have experienced and hear about the pain of our past. And a lot of that is coming out now during this pandemic, which is really, really unfortunate. So some similarities. Joella, talk about your involvement with Black Lives Matters.
Yeah, sure. So Dana, what you were saying, that really resonated. I think there's so many parallels our communities can draw with each other in terms of the eugenics movement, measuring skull sizes, things like that are just, it shocks you. Like Regina was saying, I mean, you want to cry because it's just so outrageous. And also what you were saying about being fully federally recognized and what that means. I think Black people have, not in the same way, obviously, in terms of tribes' federal recognition, but Black people have been trying to be fully federally recognized too since slavery. And I think that's where Black Lives Matter comes in. It's about, recognizing that Black lives do matter. It's about citizenry and citizenship. And the reality is that not every American citizen enjoys the full privileges that come with citizenship. And I think Black Lives Matter is about asserting Black people's rights to be citizens, just like other Americans. And I really got involved living in New York around the Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown deaths. Those sort of in the street protests really spoke to me. And I found that when I was demonstrating and learning more, it's like sort of asking for what you've already said that you've received. Like, no, we just want full citizenship. And the government's telling us that we have that, but it's not true. And so I think a lot of Black Lives Matter is it's basically asking just for the minimum. It's just asking to be brought to the level that everyone else is.
And what is that minimum? What do you think?
I think it's a recognition that communities are disproportionately impacted by policing. We can't just pretend that everyone is equal and enjoys equal protection. I think it's understanding how systemic racism has shaped not only our institutions, but, sort of the fabric of all of our lives, whether or not you're white or Black. White people enjoy the benefits of that institutionalized racism, and Black people, suffer from that. So I think bringing things to the minimum is sort of just understanding that in order to make things better, you have to first recognize that the history, you know, of slavery in this country, Jim Crow, hundreds and hundreds of years of oppression is, you know, that takes more work to undo than just kind of saying, well, everyone's equal, so we'll take it from here. You have to do work on the backside to, you know, help remedy some of those things.
It's interesting how in George Floyd, the tipping point, it's really what everyone is calling it, because it's not as if this didn't exist before, but we see it now. We just see it differently. And it's almost as if somebody opened up a book and said, here everything is. So do you think it will help? And this is for both of you. Do you think it will help as we change these names? So whatever the Washington Redskins turns out to be, or Land O'Lake butter, the imprinting that's been there for so many years. Joella, do you think that will make a difference?
I really hope so. I mean, I think that, you know, it's really easy to be cynical and say exactly what you're saying. You know, this has always been a problem. Finally, you know, white people are waking up now, but come on, like, we've been fighting this fight for so long. But I mean, there's been a lot of really exciting change that's happened just in a very short period of time. I mean, Minneapolis alone, just completely rethinking their entire approach to policing. That happened because people are in the streets and asking, you know, they're demanding change. So I think changing those names of household products that we all rely on, I think it will have an impact. I think it might make someone who's never thought of that before say, oh my gosh, wow, really, I have had this sort of mammy cartoon in my cupboard. Like, whoa, that, you know, like, let me look at some other things. Like, how is this impacting me as a white person, not just as someone, you know, whose children are being slayed by police? So I think it's a really, really good sign.
And I think it's like, you know, we used to have smoking in a lot of places, and I remember those places, restaurants, airplanes. And, you know, when they first came up with the idea of we're going to have these no smoking areas, I think I thought to myself, how is that going to work? And now it's you're almost weirded out if you see someone smoking. So we did that. So I do think that these tiny little pebbles can be created into stepping stones of something in the right direction. It is not going to happen overnight. I mean, the protests could go on for 10 years and there's still going to be a lot of struggles. But I think that, again, I lean on the youth. I'm a high school librarian, so I really lean on the youth. And I promise you, I'm optimistic about our future.
I'm glad you are, because I am too. I really, really am. Well, what can we learn, Dana, from some of the struggles that Native Americans have gone through for a long, long time? How do we take some of those struggles and what we've learned and blend that into today so that we can do some things differently?
Again, I think it's not to give up. I've had the same conversations with my African American friends and Hispanic friends with my two sons about interacting with the police officers, way before it became this conversation. You know, I think that we just got to continue raising these issues and not allowing people to keep these narrow-minded ways because they're a certain age or they're a certain political party. I mean, we have got to embrace this kindness. I mean, I think that every day we need to celebrate our differences as well as our similarities. And you know, like we all know, we all originate from the same place. I think I know I've done this diversity workshop with teachers. There is more diversity in penguins than there are in humans. But you look at penguins and they all look alike. So what is our problem? I mean, is it literally the skin color? I mean, we gotta step away from that and just be kinder to one another.
Joella, what in the kindness, Dana, is huge. Isn't that just basic fundamentals? Yeah, that we would just be kind to each other and treat people as we want to be treated. That alone. But I do wonder, what ideas do you all have about how we break the barriers around racism? How do we break it? I love the boldness of the Black Lives Matters in many of the cities, painting the streets, getting communities involved, having artists out there, just to sort of say, we matter. How do we break down some of those barriers? What ideas do you have?
I think everyone needs to vote. I think we all need to be big voting rights activists because, so much of what's happening in terms of voter disenfranchisement is really targeted in communities of color and marginalized communities. If we were able to make it possible for people to vote in our communities, I think that we would see change. It's so important to see change on these sort of local levels too, and municipal levels, because the judges that we have in our local communities, those are the judges that are setting bail and setting, sentencing. Those are the judges that are sentencing young Black people to larger sentences, and those judges are implicated in our political system. So I think for me, it's terrifying how much some people are working to disenfranchise our communities from voting. But I think in this moment, my focus, I think, really is just trying to get people to vote, and making it possible for people to vote. Like, people want to vote, but there's a lot of powerful people trying to make it so that folks aren't able to. So I think for me, like, step one is just is voting, because obviously the political process isn't everything, and obviously, there's a lot of change and revolution that has to happen completely outside of politics, and it's a frustrating system. But I think that we have to start by participating, and we have to vote.
Yes, I agree. I agree. I definitely think that matters. And when I talk to students, I explain to them, before you vote, you need to go into it like you're studying for an exam. You need to ask yourself, how does this affect me, my community, my family, in my case, my tribe, and vote to how it's going to benefit you. I also think, like, there's a really cool 1970s song called "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." It's one of my favorites. And I've been listening to it lately. I made a podcast called, it's something like the Shut-In podcast for myself, or song list. This revolution is televised. And I think that we need to be having our cameras on. We need to be educating ourselves. We need to be reading characters that are not like ourselves so that we can have empathy. We need to be reading, real stories as well as fictional stories about people that are not like us. And we just need to, record when something goes bad. I am okay with the police working a little bit harder. I am.
It is being televised for certain. And it's really sad that has to happen in order to get everyone's attention. But that really is what's going on. So what do you have in your futures around the actions that you're each taking around the social justice movement? Joella, how about you? What do you have planned?
So I am currently studying for the New York State bar exam. So all of these hopes and dreams are depending on me passing addressing that. But
that's a priority.
I went to law school because I really wanted to be a civil rights lawyer. And throughout my time at school, I've become really involved in issues affecting pregnant women inside in our carceral system. So, a lot of people are sort of more awake now in terms of, pregnant women being shackled when they give birth. And there's been a lot of change in state and federal legislation there. But I'm really interested in how Black and Brown women are treated in the birthing process when they enter the criminal justice system. So my hope is to become a lawyer that can help Black and Brown pregnant women inside, and sort of just more general prison reform is the work I'm most interested in doing. So step one is the bar, and hopefully I can be able to work on some of these things.
When you accomplish that, claim it, you will pass the bar and you will become a civil rights attorney. And we applaud you for that. Absolutely. We need you. So thank you for taking that on. And Dana, your life work has been really around your tribe and building awareness around Native Americans. So what more do you plan for the future?
I'll continue to speak at schools on a regular basis and encourage them to ask me to speak other than Thanksgiving. But I'm also have extended this speaking to a lot of museums. I went to the Daughters of the Revolution this year and spoke to them. So I'm trying to, cast a wider net. I've even thought of the idea of kind of making a kit so that when I can't go to a school, they can open up this kit and find things inside with, me speaking on behalf of my tribe, and a turtle purse, and what pigskin feels like on a regalia, different things that they could touch and feel. So if I can do things, virtually in that realm as well.
So all about awareness, though, which I really appreciate hearing. Thank you both. So we are meeting during a time when there's intense discussion about the health of our nation as this pandemic, this virus, we keep increasing the cases around it. I mean, we're at a record high right now. In fact, instead of going forward, it seems like we're going backwards, where we have more cases today than we did when we first started. So I want to make sure in this podcast that we are encouraging everyone to practice safety. Wear your mask, social distance, wash your hands often for the health and well-being of everyone. And we know that in our communities, Black and Brown communities, where we are disproportionately impacted, that's been hard. Young people have been out there, all ages. We're at the beaches. We're not taking this thing as seriously as we need to. So what piece of advice would you say for people that are in your network around this virus and what they should do to keep safe? Joella?
I think that what you said, it's so true, and it's really scary. I mean, here in New York City, I feel like the epicenter was here, and people were really feeling it and hearing the sirens and, seeing the hospital in Central Park and watching healthcare providers sobbing on the street, so there was a little bit more of that shock factor, but it's scary. And I think it's really, really important that young people are hyper aware of all of these safety measures, just because, and we also don't understand the virus, obviously it affects certain people more, but our communities are really suffering. And in order for us to, help everyone, we have to first be aware of our own actions. So I think people still need to stay inside, don't go to a bar, wear your mask all the time when you're outside, and help spread the word.
Thank you. Dana, how about you?
Yeah, it's hard for my tribe to social distance. A lot of them rely on extended family members to do a lot of things, cousins and aunts and grandmothers. So to them, not social distancing is not going to TJ Maxx. But I'll have 42 people over because we all got to eat, and that's just what we do. Also, a lot of them are, on these free meals, so they're going to have to go out and expose themselves to strangers to get access to food. So our chairperson of our tribe, which would be considered like the chief of the tribe, came on very early on and made a video, and he talked about your strongholds, being your grandmother and your family. And he said, if you don't wear a mask, you're hurting my grandmother and you're hurting your grandmother. And those are heavy words because, those are the people that we want to protect the most. So I feel like we just need to take this very seriously. And the reason that I wear a mask is not because I'm afraid of your cough. I'm afraid of my cough hurting you. Again, it comes back to that kindness. I'm wearing it because I want to protect you. So when I see someone without one, it makes me wonder, why don't they want to protect me and my family?
Well, keep talking about it. Keep talking about it amongst your peers and your communities, because it really, really makes a difference and it will save lives.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you to our listeners. Thank you, Joella and Dana, for sharing your stories, your thoughts, your perspectives with us. Please join us next week to continue our discussion on trust across race and culture as the champions join the conversation.